My name is Doug Milliken. I was in the United States Army Infantry in 1969 and 1970 in the Vietnam War. The title of this presentation is Operation Eichelberger Black, which was a 5-week brigade-wide operation in the Central Highlands of Vietnam back in 1970. My purpose is just to describe what a typical infantry operation was like. Giving this presentation on behalf of the Freedom Committee of Orange County, which is a group of veterans that are trained and prepared to go into classrooms in Orange County. And we give presentations to students on our personal experiences in the military. We leave the teaching of history to history teachers, and we just speak about our own personal experience. I was a sergeant in the 4th Infantry Division, squad leader in a reconnaissance platoon, which was Echo Company, 3rd Battalion, 8th Infantry. After basic training, which was an 8-week course up at Fort Ord in Monterey, California, everyone that came out of basic was assigned an occupational specialty. Mine was 11B, Light Weapons Infantryman. And I was sent to advanced individual training also at Fort Ord, which was 9 weeks long, where we were trained how to be an infantryman. In advanced individual training, we received a lot of physical training, a lot of training on weapons, and prepared to go into combat. At the conclusion of the 9 weeks, most of the graduates of that course were deployed to Vietnam as private first-class infantrymen. Myself and a handful of others were selected to go to Fort Benning, Georgia, and attend a 12-week course, which was non-commissioned officers candidate school. That was a program the Army created just during the Vietnam War because they had insufficient sergeants that were qualified to perform as squad leaders in Vietnam. That was a unique problem because most of the soldiers in Vietnam had a 2-year Army tour and 1 year in Vietnam. And under normal progression, when you went to Vietnam as a private, you might make specialist 4th class after 3 or 4 months, and you might make sergeant after 9, 10, 11 months. But by the time you were promoted to sergeant, you didn't have that much time left. And so before the NCO program, there were a lot of privates and Spec Force performing as squad leaders, which was fine, but the Army didn't prefer that. They wanted to have their squad leaders be sergeants. So the 12-week course that we took in Fort Benning included more physical training, more weapons training, but in addition, it included training in leadership, tactics, navigation, and some advanced weapons, which was things like being trained on how to call in artillery to a specific spot on the map, things like that. I have basically 3 presentations that I give in the classroom. So the first one that I started giving was on the northern thrust of the Cambodia incursion by the 4th Infantry Division in May of 1970. And that was the largest helicopter combat assault of the Vietnam War by U.S. forces. And so that was the big story. I gave that quite a few times. And I found that especially in the younger grades, the students, when they asked their questions, they had a lot of basic questions. They didn't ask about the big battles so much. They asked things like, what did you eat? How did you get food? What did you do? Did you get a day off from time to time? And if so, how did you spend your day off? Those kinds of basic questions. And so I developed another presentation, which I called Daily Reconnaissance. And in there, I answered a lot of those questions and explained what a typical day in the jungle was like for a reconnaissance. Now, this presentation, Operation Eichelberger Black, I developed that because after talking so much about the Cambodia incursion was only 15 days long, my involvement in it, and yet I was in Vietnam for 8.5 months. So Operation Eichelberger Black is to describe what the other 8 months was typically like. So in NCO school, we learned navigation. Everybody was issued an M1950 compass and trained how to use it and how to relate it to a map And this is just a typical map. When I go in the classroom, I show this map and I ask who knows what those lines represent. And usually there's either nobody, maybe one guy. The most I've ever had is two that knew the answer. And the answer is that those lines represent constant elevation. So anybody that's done backpacking in the Sierras and used a topographical map might be familiar with these maps. But we're trained how to read these maps, to look at this map and see the terrain in 3D. When I look at this map, the first thing I notice is the blue lines, which is streams. And so those are the low points. So that represents a valley. And if you look over to the right edge of the map, a little above center here, there's a circle. So everything on that line is constant elevation. Everything inside the line is higher. That's a tip of a hill. And then the concentric circles around the hill are elevation lines. The elevation lines are 10 meters. They represent 10 meters of elevation separation. So when you drop to the first line, you've dropped 10 meters, which is 30 feet. And then the second line would be 60 meters or 20 meters or 60 feet. And so on. So when you look at this hill, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down to the bottom of the hill. So that's 60 meters, a couple hundred feet high. That's the height of that little hill. So if you look over at the very left center edge, there's not a lot of lines in that area, and that represents a valley. It's pretty flat out there in the valley. And then just the south side of that, the lines are all stacked on top of each other, and that represents a cliff. So if your helicopter dropped you in the middle of this map and you looked at the map and you needed to get over to that valley, you could see that you wouldn't want to go across and face a cliff. So you'd probably follow the stream up northwest and find a place to cross down into the valley. That would be passable, that kind of thing. So you just learn to look at the map and see it in 3D. Here's an example on another map of some features. Below this red mark on the right, there's a funny little formation there. So everything on that line is constant elevation. Inside the line is higher. So what that is, it's a U-shaped hilltop. And if you were to go out the open end of that U and go 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, and look off to the right, to your right, you would see another funny formation. There's a little circle here, and there's another little circle, and there's a line that goes around both circles, and then there's concentric lines around that. So what that represents is the Twin Peak hilltop, and this is what it looks like in reality. So I'm on a helicopter here, and I'm coming in to land on the U-shaped hilltop, which is LZ Susie. It has a fire base on there, so there's artillery equipment up there. But you can see the U, right there is the U shape. If you go out the open end, go about 2 kilometers, look off to the right, there's your Twin Peak Hill. So that's what we learned, is how to look at the map and see this. I wrote a book. The title of the book is Testimony of the Protected. It's available on Amazon. The map in the book for the region of Indochina is depicted here in Figure 1. The demilitarized zone separates communist North Vietnam from free South Vietnam. Our enemy, the North Vietnamese Army portion of the enemy, came out of North Vietnam, and most of them came on what was called the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is represented by the orange arrows. The Ho Chi Minh Trail originates in North Vietnam at various points of origin, different trails that come across the border into Laos, and they come south. Now, it's shown here as a single trail, but it's actually a web. It's a network of trails, roads, and bridges. And they would bring people and equipment south, staying out of South Vietnam because the Americans were not allowed to go into Laos and Cambodia early in the war. So they could stay out there and be safe from us. Along this trail, going all the way down to the bottom of South Vietnam, they set up what they call base areas all along there. And the base areas were places where the troops could gather. They would store equipment there. They had hospitals on the base areas, convalescent centers where they could get over their wounds. They did training, different things like that. So typically a unit would amass at a base area when they're ready to go and get all equipped. They would launch east somewhere into South Vietnam and conduct military operations against us and our allies. And then if they got beat up and tattered, and they could retreat and go back to their base area and get restocked and replace the guys they lost with new guys coming in. And when they're good and ready to go again, they could venture back into South Vietnam. So that's the way they worked. My unit, the 4th Infantry Division, operated within the boundaries of this blue rectangle that I've got shown here. And that's in an area called the Central Highlands. The military designation was called 2 Corps. And if you zoom in on that box, it looks like this. Pleiku, An Khê, and Quy Nhon are fairly large cities. Just north of An Khê was Camp Radcliffe, and that's where the 4th Infantry Division was based. And Operation Eichelberger Black happened up here in Vinh Tan Valley, also called Happy Valley, just north of Camp Radcliffe. So this is what Camp Radcliffe looked like. It's a permanent base, pretty large, a little bit of electricity here and there, so a little running water here and there. There was mess halls for the different divisions, so that if you were permanently based there, you could eat in a mess hall. And the big open area near the rear there is the airfield. There's lots of helicopters stored. There's fixed-wing aircraft and a runway, and a lot of facilities at Camp Radcliffe. If you zoom in on Camp Radcliffe, these are what the buildings on Radcliffe look like. My company, which was Echo Company, which consisted of the Reconnaissance platoon and the mortar platoon, had one of these barracks. So when we finished any operation, such as Eichelberger Black, after 5 weeks or so, we could come back here and spend a couple days just relaxing and eat in the mess hall, get a shower, get a little entertainment, little musical entertainment, have a barbecue, stuff like that, and then go out on the next mission. Operation Eichelberger Black happened here in Vinh Tan Valley, called Happy Valley. We're looking at it here. The width of this map for reference is approximately 10 miles. Vinh Tan Valley is an area of about 100 square miles, a vast area. Now, this area was mostly cleared of civilians. So they dropped leaflets out of aircraft so that anybody that was in that area, any civilian, would be notified that this is what's called a free fire zone. And that means you'll be out here at your own peril. Our orders were that while we're out in the free fire zone, anyone we find that's not an American soldier is assumed to be enemy and should be engaged accordingly. So the population moved back towards the river. You can see along the river, there's little dots everywhere. Those are little villages, little hamlets. So most of the population that existed was near the river. In this area, the North Vietnamese Army established what they called Base Area 226. So when they say base area, it's spread out all over the place. It's not a single point. You can't put your finger on them, but they're split up and they're constantly on the move and they're dug in. They might have facilities where they store weapons and food, and they have alternate facilities. They would move back and forth from A to B. So even when you locate them and you know where they are, if you come back a week later, they may not be there. They might be somewhere else. Down at the lower left is LZ Hard Times, or Fire Support Base Hard Times. On that base, we had artillery, 105 millimeter howitzers. The range of a 105 howitzer is the maximum is about 12 miles, just a little bit wider than this map. So they can cover most of what's in Vinh Tan Valley. When we were at the end of this operation, we were up at the upper right-hand corner of this map. We might have been served by one of the other 2 battalions in our brigade because they might have actually been closer. Eichelberger Black consisted of 3 battalions. This is one of them. So there was 2 other battalions nearby, and they each had their own fire base. So you might ask, how did I remember all the details of this operation? And the answer is I didn't remember them at all. Consequently, when I wrote my book, I went to this building in College Park, Maryland, which is one building of the National Archives where Vietnam records are kept, and walked in that door down there at the bottom and got trained on how to handle the national treasures of the National Archives. And then you go up to the appropriate floor where your records are and go to a place like this, which is a National Archives reading room. So this gentleman in the foreground, I sat at a desk exactly like that. And you can see there's a console on the middle of the desk that's got electrical outlets. You can have 4 researchers at one table. And then when I got there, I went up to a counter that's just off the left edge of this photo, big long counter. And I went up to a person and said, I would like to have the daily journals for the 3rd Battalion of the 8th Infantry for the period of December 1969 to September of 1970, which was the period that I was in Vietnam. About a half an hour later, someone would roll out a cart of these gray pods that you can see one right behind this researcher. And each of those pods is labeled. They're in chronological order. You're allowed to remove one pod at a time. And if you look in that pod, you see there's like a card sticking up in the middle of the documents. And what you are required to do is you're allowed to pull out the first document on the back half of that. And then you're allowed to view one document at a time. You can plug in a scanner if you want and scan the document. You can photograph it with your cell phone, or you can go off to the side and use copy machines and pay a fee and make copies, whatever you need to do. But when you're done examining that one document, then you put it back on the front side of that card, and then you take the next one. So you're working your way through. It's real regimented. You're not allowed to do whatever you want. If you find something that's out of order, you're not allowed to put it in order. You call a clerk, they come over, you tell them what the problem is, and they sort it. So that's where I got my information. So what I was doing with this information is I was looking at documents like this. This is, you can see on the title at the top, it's a daily staff journal or duty officer's log. This is page 6 of 8. It's 8 pages for one day. So this is a part of a day. And it shows that it's for the 3rd Battalion, 8th Infantry. The location is LZ Hard Times. That's the location of the command post. And it gives the map location. Now, I highlighted in yellow things that pertain to the reconnaissance platoon, just as an example here. I'll be talking about some of these things in the future, on future slides. But on the first one, it's 1715, which is 5:15 in the evening. It says 3-8 alerted to react to long-range recon patrol, contact Vin Tan. Vin Tan Mountain. What that was is there were some long-range recon patrols that were up at a mountain called Vin Tan Mountain, which was called by the nickname LZ Snipe. And they got into contact with some enemy and they needed our help. So we went up there. I'll talk about that a little later. That was 5:15. You come down to 1743. So it's only 12 minutes later. It says Recon Rear Reactionary Force lifted off. 12 minutes after that, Recon Rear Reactionary Force on the ground at map location 693615. At 6 o'clock, 38th Recon ambush consisting of 7 people and 1 forward observer with Sergeant Milliken. That was me, and I took 7 guys and a forward observer off of the Hard Times on a night ambush. And then at 6:10, Recon Rear Reactionary Force received a little small arms fire, requests 5 more people. And then down at the bottom at 16:35, Recon ambush reached its night location at map BR 607622. So the point is, it's recounting exactly when and exactly where different things happen, things that I had long forgotten, but my memory's refreshed by these documents. So I took this information and I entered it on a Excel workbook that I created. This is a picture of the page for the month of April. And I just put the day of the month down the left-hand side. And as I learned things that happen on certain days, I just make notes. In addition to what I found at the National Archives, I'm getting facts that I'm learning out of my letters that I had sent home from Vietnam. I read those and made notes. And also I had what was the 4th Division called their operation reports and lessons learned, which was a large quarterly report for the entire division. So I read through those, and that not only told the big picture of what was going on with the battalion and the brigade, but the other brigades as well. So I put everything into context. And so this is what I used when I wrote my book to get things straight. So this is what LZ hard times, or fire support base hard times, looked like during construction. On the left is artillery pieces that are being set up. Across the top, horizontal, there is a runway. You can see there's 4 helicopters sitting on the front edge of the runway. So all the missions that we took out of hard times went off of that runway. And the reconnaissance platoon constructed a bunker over here on the right side, probably one of these bunkers. And that was on the perimeter of LZ hard times. So when we first got there, the engineers had come and dug a bunch of holes like this with a backhoe and left the dirt a pile. We were assigned a hole, our platoon. Our platoon is about 30 guys. And later they came back with a pallet of empty sandbags and went out and cut down some trees and cut some 8 and 12-foot long logs and brought those back by and dumped them. So we had the materials to construct a bunker. We would lay sandbags around that opening. First, we'd get in there with shovels and square out the hole, make it nice. Put some sandbags around the outer edge, lay some logs on there, put a layer of sandbags on, construct a fighting bunker. So when our bunker was done, here we are on top of our bunker. You can see we built a little protection on the side there while we're watching guard. We can do it from on top of the bunker or inside the bunker. That's me with my back to the camera, and we're just getting ready for some orders of what's next for us. That's me on the right with my friend Larry. And there we are on top of the bunker having a shaving cream fight. And before we got our first orders, we took one part of a day and went down to the Salcon River, got a little bath and took a little swim, a little recreation, a little whitewater rafting. And then we got ready for our next assignment. Now we're back here at the lower left-hand corner at LZ Hard Times. And our first assignment was a march. I call it the Easter Force March, because on the day before Easter, we went up to the helipad and we were delivered up here. The river goes up and there's a knee in the river, and we were delivered north of that somewhere up here. In the middle of the afternoon, we set up a night defensive perimeter for the evening because it was too late in the day to go very far, and spent the night, got up in the morning, had a little breakfast, broke camp, and we went east across the tributary here. And then we turned south and we followed the river all the way back to LZ Hard Times. When we got down close to Hard Times, we did a river crossing to get on the right side of the river to walk back in to LZ Hard Times. When we did the river crossing, this is a picture I took of us doing the river crossing. By the way, almost all the pictures that I'm showing here are mine that I took myself. A few I got from some platoon mates. You can see that we could see the bottom of the river, which indicated it looked like we could probably walk across it. If you look off in the distance, you can see there's a little bit of white water there. It wouldn't have been too good a place to cross. But so we just walked across this river. Now, as you can see, when you hit the other side, you got a big problem because of that brush. And you got to climb up a hill, and that's a pretty tough climb. You got to get out a machete and whack the vines, and there's a lot of challenges. So back at LZ Hard Times, now we're waiting for our next assignment. And we were told that we're being put on at what's called a rear reactionary force. And that means we're on 15-minute notice to get on helicopters and go join some part of the battalion that was in an emergency. So we're an emergency reaction force. While we're waiting, we're just doing bunker guard. Our lieutenant sent me out with a squad to do a night ambush, which is just off the left edge of this map. And while we were out there getting ready to set up an ambush. The rear reactionary force was called into action, and the rest of the platoon went to this area that's designated near the center of the map, lower edge, called LZ Snipe. And we were left behind because we were out on an ambush. The reason they were sent there was at LZ Snipe, there was some long-range recon patrol that had a relay station, a radio relay station on this hill. And they had some patrols down the hill, and they got into contact with the North Vietnamese force and had to escape because it was the long-range recon group is only 4 or 5 guys. So when they make contact with the enemy, they seek to break contact. They don't engage the enemy because they're too small. So when they got in contact, they basically ran. And so they couldn't get caught. They dropped their packs and left them behind and took off. And when I got to LZ Snipe the next day, I got on a helicopter with some of the long-range recon patrol and some of my own guys. We went down to the site of that contact so they could recover their equipment. And when we got down there, I stayed with the helicopter, not with the helicopter, but at the landing zone where the helicopter came in with another guy, and we just secured the opening while the rest of the guys went down and retrieved the equipment and came back. And then we called the helicopter back. We got on and we went back to LZ Snipe. So that's what it looked like up on LZ Snipe. It was downhill in all directions. It was pretty steep on most sides. Boulders up there. The bald guy on the right was our platoon leader, Lieutenant Virgil Judah. You see the guy in the middle has some binoculars, and they're just watching down below. We knew the enemy was down there because we could hear on the radio the other units in our battalion were making contact, and we could hear that going on around us. It was a very active area. We were there for, 5 or 6 nights. But on one night when it was dark, we could hear some noise down below. And it was like, quiet, can you just listen? Can you hear? It sounds like somebody's down there. And you hear rustling down there. And so we just pulled the pin on a hand grenade and rolled it off the edge of the hill, let it roll down and explode, and then rolled another one down there. And then we didn't hear anything else. Now, we had concertina wire going all the way around this hill. If an enemy sapper was trying to get up to us, they'd have to get through the wire, which would take them some time. The next day, I took a couple of guys and we went outside the wire, went down there, and we found the shoe prints of the guy that was making the noise. It was definitely an NVA. It was a sandal print. In the background, you can see some artillery supporting some kind of an operation that's going on in the hill behind us. That's what it looked like on the hill. We had bunkers because we were susceptible to mortar attacks by the enemy up here. They could see us because it was a radio relay station. There was antennas and we were obvious up there. So we had to have holes. This was a bunker for the mortar platoon. So there's mortar rounds down inside the bunker. There's a few mortar rounds laying on the top. That red and white pole in the back is an aiming pole for the mortar. And when mortars came in, you had a couple seconds to get in a hole because you could hear the round whistling, breaking air coming in. And as soon as you hear that sound, you have to dive in a hole. And if you get there in 2 or 3 seconds, you'd probably be okay unless the mortar came right in the hole. So that's the Lieutenant Virgil Judah, our platoon leader right there with one of his guys, and they're just scoping the landscape. A couple things to notice in this picture for later. One is notice that boulder, because later on I'm going to talk about boulders. And when I talk about a boulder, that's what I'm talking about is a rock that size. Also notice the antenna that's coming off that PRC-25 radio. That's the lieutenant's radio telephone operator. And that's going to come into play in a future too. So keep that in mind. We had helicopters coming in on a daily basis. Some of it was resupply, bringing in food and ammo and things. We had visits from chaplains. We had a Catholic chaplain and a Protestant chaplain that visited on different days, and they would come in, and anybody that wanted to confer with them could do that. They'd hold a little service, and then they'd go back home. One day we had our battalion commander, who was a lieutenant colonel, come in. Usually when he visited us, it was a surprise. He didn't announce he was coming. Because if he announced, then we'd get ready for him and look spiff, but he didn't want that. He wanted to see us as we were. So one day he showed up unannounced and had a conversation with our platoon leader, and he asked him how many patrols did he have out around LZ Snipe. Now, I was standing right next to him, so I heard the conversation, and Lieutenant Judah told us, "Sir, I don't have any patrols out right now." And he said, "Oh, really? Why not?" And Lieutenant Judah said, "Well, sir, because I didn't see how putting patrols out was going to get a single man home a day sooner," which was not the correct answer. So he was relieved of his duties and told to get on the colonel's helicopter with his pack. And he went away and we never saw him again. So we spent the night without a leader. And the next day, a new platoon leader was sent up to us. That was Lieutenant Janace. And after a couple of days more days up here, we were sent on another mission down the hill somewhere. So here we are at LZ Snipe with our new platoon leader. And what we did is we got on a helicopter and we just went a short distance somewhere out in the middle of Happy Valley. It just spent a couple of days getting used to our new platoon leader. I don't know where we went. It didn't matter. I didn't even bother to look it up. But after a couple of days, then they radioed us, said, "We have a new mission. We're going to Nui Vak Ka, which is down here in the bottom of the map, right of center." So we were picked up in the middle of nowhere and brought to Nui Vak Ka. Now, if you zoom in at Nui Vak Ka, what happened was something that was depicted in my book in a chapter called Dancing in Elephant Grass, chapter 7. Elephant grass, this is elephant grass. It's a 7-8 foot tall grass. And when you're down in it, you can't see very far in front of your face. It's kind of being in the middle of a mature cornfield or something. That's what elephant grass is. So when you zoom in on Nui Vak Ka, it looks like this. You see the circle here? Everything on that line is constant elevation at 754 meters high. That's about 2,200 foot elevation. And then it's downhill in all directions. And now I'm going to go to a drawing. This is a tracing of that map, leaving out every other line on the elevation lines just so you can see it better and so I can make markings on this drawing. But at hill 754, there was boulders on the top of that hill. There's a finger down this side, and boulders ran all the way down the finger, and there's a finger on the other side, and the boulders ran all the way down the finger. So there's a line of boulders. Now, off to the left of the boulders is all triple canopy jungle, very tall trees and dense. To the north of the creek is also triple canopy jungle, very dense. But most of the area off to the east of the boulder line is pretty open, not a lot of big trees. And down near the creek is the elephant grass. The landing zone where we came in is marked here at LZ, and that's an area where it wasn't flat, but it was much less steep than anywhere else in the area. And so our helicopters came in there one at a time, probably 6 helicopters, 30 guys. We got off there. Now, at the time we came in, there was a plan, but that plan changed. When it changed, our Tactical Operations Command told our platoon leader, "Go on down the hill and hang out. We'll let you know what we need you to do in a few minutes. We got to figure something out." So we went down to the elephant grass. Now, what we thought was going to be about a 15-minute wait turned into hours. It was 2 or 3 hours we were down there. And we started getting nervous because you don't like to be in one spot for 2 or 3 hours, especially when you're down on the low ground and there's a hilltop with a bunch of boulders on it looking down on you. And so the Tactical Operation Command told our platoon leader that they had a helicopter they wanted to bring in because there was 3 members of the Recon platoon that had been in the rear for personal business that needed to return out to us in the field. Plus, our Kit Carson scout had been in the rear for some reason, and he needed to come out. So there was 4 different guys, and they wanted to get him out there. And we told them, there's a rule of thumb, you don't bring a helicopter into the same LZ that you came into previously, because when the first helicopter comes in, it alerts the enemy and they start focusing in on that area, and dangerous to be using it again. The So we told the Tactical Operations Command, we're going to have to go find another LZ somewhere. The problem was there wasn't anything in sight, and it would have taken maybe a couple hours, and it was getting late. We didn't really have time. So they finally decided to just bring the helicopter back into the same LZ. Now, when that resupply helicopter came in, it came in from left to right, flew across here, touched down the right side of the helicopter at the LZ, and the enemy had collected up here on the top of the mountain behind the boulders. As soon as the helicopter touched, before anybody got off, they fired on it with automatic weapons, and the helicopter pilot immediately flew up and off, and he went off and circled around and went back to base. That helicopter crashed on the way back to base due to the damage that was done to it. And a couple of the guys were shot in the initial machine gun fire. Now, I know that everybody on the helicopter survived, and so I can easily deduce that the helicopter pilot, he lost control of the helicopter, but not entirely. He was able, obviously, to minimize the damage, which is the only reason anybody survived, but it was pretty badly damaged helicopter. As soon as the helicopter left, the enemy then opened up on the elephant grass, and so there was 25, 28 of us down there in the elephant grass, and they just opened up, and there was nothing we could do. We were pinned down. You couldn't stand up. First of all, I was at the back of the group, so I couldn't fire my weapon because I would have been firing right over the top of my platoon mates. And if you stood up, you'd probably get killed. What I did was I just laid on the ground and made as small a target as I could make. I put my rucksack in front of my helmet. I put my helmet on, and I just pressed my cheek into the ground and waited it out. And there was AK-47 rounds buzzing past both sides of my head and overhead and kicking up dirt. And it was a harrowing experience, to say the least. Our platoon leader, Lieutenant, who had just joined us, was shot in the stomach. One of our guys, Bernie Reisner, was shot in the leg and was very seriously wounded. My platoon leader, my platoon sergeant, was grazed in the arm. And we didn't know how many guys were up there. We didn't know how long this was going to last, but the firing stopped. And we called in gunships to come help us chase those guys out of there. And when we called for the helicopter gunships, we were told there was none available right now because they were all out on missions, and they would take a helicopter crew and have them come back and get refueled and rearmed, and they'd be out there as soon as they could get there, which was probably 20, 30 minutes or so it took them to get there, which is blazing fast to finish a mission, get refueled, rearmed, get there in 20, 30 minutes. But when you're in a situation like we were in, that felt like an eternity. And when those gunships got there, we got in contact with them on the radio. We popped a smoke grenade down in the grass so that he could see where we were. And then we told him, follow the boulder line and just light that area up with miniguns and rocket fire, which is what they did. There was 2 gunships, and they just ran circles, and they just ran right up that rock line. Now, the problem we had was when our guy popped the smoke grenade to show the helicopter pilot where our location was, that smoke grenade caught the elephant grass on fire, and it went up really quick. So on top of everything else, we had to get out of there because we were going to burn up. So we left so quickly that most of us left our packs behind. We just took our weapons, our ammo, some water, and we retreated north across that creek, leaving our packs behind. And once the gunships finished unloading their weaponry, then some medevac helicopters came in to pick up the wounded. And once we got them all out of there, we all went across the creek and went up to the north, and we went up to the next mountain and spent the night up there without any supplies or any food or anything. And then the morning following, we called for an extraction and got out of there. We went from this area, Nui Vat Ka, we went back to LZ Hard Times. We got there, we had to call to Camp Radcliffe and ordered all the equipment we had lost. It took several days to get replacement equipment sent up to us on trucks. LZ Hard Times was accessible by road, so they were able to run that equipment up to us on trucks. And also, we were quite disheveled, so it took us a few days to get ourselves mentally sorted and ready for another mission. We went out and took some target practice outside the perimeter of Hard Times, came back in and cleaned our weapons, got our equipment all going, and got ready for the next mission, which is depicted in my book in another chapter 8 called Romantic Tragedy. So there's the helicopters warming up on the helipad, getting ready for our next mission. And we're off to the side, getting ready, waiting for the call to board the helicopters. The guy on the right is the lieutenant's radio telephone operator. He would be checking out radio frequencies and map coordinates and things because he has to know all that stuff. The tallest guy there on the left is our platoon sergeant Hughes. He's the oldest guy in our platoon, probably actually in his 30s, a career sergeant. When we were ready to go, we boarded the helicopters, and there we go. We're just leaving because we're down by the river where the villages are and rice paddies and stuff. We're going to leave those behind and go into the wilderness. And now we're landing in that area where the romantic tragedy occurred. Now, this is a double-topped hill, so I'm on a hill using my camera to shoot a picture of Recon that had gone down the hill, and now they're headed up the side of the next hill. And I'm at the tail end of the line of 28. But you can see there's smoke up there on the hill and a burned-out area. That's where we had brought artillery rounds in there before we landed, chase away any enemy that might be in the area. So we're headed up that hill. So this is what it looked like. That picture is taken somewhere up here in these letters. And so there's a hilltop up here where we landed. We went downhill and up to the next hilltop. And that's what it looked like from up there near the top of the hill. So that smoke is from an artillery round that landed in there. When you look down into the valley, it's a Y-shaped valley. It was like two streams coming together and a low point at each stream. And we were up there for a night or so. And we were told by Tactical Operations Control, go off to the right side of this picture, head on down the hill, and see what you can find down there in the valley. So that's a picture again on top of the hill. That's three of my guys. That's Bob Ortega, Joe Dolai, Dennis Edwards. And we're getting ready to head down the hill. So we probably came down this big. We went down a finger, and I'm saying it's probably this finger right here. We came down and came across to this first red circle. That shows a creek here, but it was dry because we didn't cross any water. But we came down, and when we got down to this first red circle, we came to what we call a high-speed trail, and that was a trail that the enemy used quite frequently, and you could discern that by the fact that the trail was hard-packed, and there'd be some loose leaves off to the side of the trail, but not many on the top of the trail, which kind of indicated that it was fairly frequently used. We got down there, the platoon leader, who was Lieutenant Lawrence Johnston, he was our new platoon leader. He called back to Tactical Operations Command and said, we've located a high-speed trail. And he put a observation patrol each direction on the trail. My squad went off here to the west. And we were up the trail in the west, and we just sat there and watched the trail in case anybody came along. Another squad went off to the east and kept an eye on this trail. And he was sitting there on the trail talking to the Tactical Operations Control. And while we were talking, it wasn't that long after we arrived, an enemy soldier came down the trail from the left, and one of my guys dropped him. It was hard to tell if he was alone or if there was anybody behind him. You never know for sure. but he didn't look like he was at the ready. He had his AK-47 slung over his shoulder. He looked a little bit casual headed down the trail. So he didn't look like a point man, but who knows? So we came back and were told to get out of there. So we went back up the hill the way we came, headed back up towards the finger. When we went up maybe 100 yards, something like that, and then took a break. And the Tactical Operation Command came on the radio and said, there's an intelligence officer here that wants you to go back down to the trail and get the shirt off of the enemy soldier, because if we return it to intelligence, they can tell from the manufacturer of the shirt what type of a unit that soldier was a part of. So Lieutenant Johnston asked me to take my squad and go back down and retrieve the shirt. And by the way, this was my first mission as a squad leader. I had been a member of a squad up until the elephant grass when my squad leader got shot, and so I replaced him. So my first mission as a squad leader was to take a group of guys and go down and get the shirt. It was a pretty scary proposition, because by the time we got back down there, I would say around an hour had elapsed. And if there was other soldiers behind him, who knows, they might be there. When we got down there, we could see that the soldier was in the same posture we left him. It didn't appear that anyone had been there. If somebody had been there, they would have moved him. And so I put a observation post up the trail in each direction and went forward to retrieve the shirt and his pack and some other things. We did it very quickly, pulled his shirt off. He was very young, definitely a teenager. I would say not even 18 years old. But we grabbed that stuff and we immediately went back up and rejoined the reconnaissance platoon. We got up there, we dumped out his pack, and his pack was not a very formal pack. It was basically just a sandbag that contained some rice. Most of what was in there was rice, but there was some toiletry items. There was a map, and he had a little 1-inch by 1-inch photo. And the photo was a picture of a beautiful young woman. So we were deducing that was either his girlfriend or his wife. And that was a pretty emotional moment, because in the process of engaging the enemy, it's useful for psychological reasons to view the enemy as evil. It eases the conscience about trying to kill him. And if he can be viewed as inhuman, that's even better. So that's the way I viewed the enemy, and so did everybody else, I think. But once you saw this photo, you realized, he's just like I am. That was kind of a moment of reality. It kind of blew the facade out of the water, caused me some emotional distress, which I had to get over very quickly, and I did. After we got everything cleaned up, we went back up to the top of the mountain. And after a couple nights, they asked us to go east a ways and go back down into the same valley and look for the same trail at a different spot. So I think we probably went down this finger over here. So we came down there. Now, when you come down a finger like that, everything in front of you is downhill. Everything on both sides is downhill. It's triple canopy jungle. When we got down somewhere where these lines are separated, we called for a resupply, and a helicopter came in, and it wasn't flat enough for him to land, but there was a little opening in the trees, and he was able to hover about 20 feet off the ground and kick our supplies out the door and let it fall 20 feet to the ground. And then we unpacked it and loaded it into our rucksacks. It was ammunition and food and water and things. And then once we do that, we clean up the trash, don't leave anything of value for the enemy to get. And then we continued on down the finger. Now we got down the finger, we came back to the trail somewhere along the trail. We intended to be much further from where we were the first time, but according to the map coordinates on the reports, we were actually closer than I thought we were. We were actually about here. When we were coming down, it was dense, and so the guys that were in the front, they didn't even see the trail till they were on top of it. Then they stopped. Okay, trail, and they backed up because you don't want to be too close to the trail. And we just bunched up in a circular cluster there, and we were taking a little break, and we were tired from the march down the hill. And while we were taking a break, we heard voices of someone coming down the trail from the east. And the voices were Vietnamese. We couldn't see them because there was a little rise in the trail, and they were on the other side of the rise. So we just waited, and we couldn't move because you couldn't make movement or noise or they would see you. And so we just froze. And those soldiers, when they came across the hill, which was very close, I would say the hill from us was 15 yards or something like that. They came across the rise in the trail and they stopped and they backed across the trail. And when they did that, we thought, oh man, we're in trouble. They must have seen us or heard us or something. Why would they back up unless they figured there was danger ahead? And there was a problem. Our guys, some of them wanted to move and get out of there. And they said, no, stay still, don't move. And after a short while, they came back across the rise in the trail, and our guys down on the front of the trail took out the first two. The rest of them escaped across the rise in the trail. The guys in the front said there was 6 or 7 soldiers, and they were Viet Cong. You could tell they weren't North Vietnamese because they weren't wearing the North Vietnamese uniform. They were wearing civilian clothes like black pajamas. So we collected the AK-47 off of one of these guys that was killed, and we retreated back up. This is what the jungle looked like coming down, and this is when my squad was on the point. So in front of me is the point man. I'm in the second position. There's 26 or 27 guys behind us in single file, and we're coming down the finger. That was the AK-47 from the first guy, the young guy, and it was in very excellent condition. And that's me holding the AK-47 from one of the VC, which was rusted and the wood was rotten. It was in horrible condition. I was surprised that it was still in service. And then after an evening, we were told to find an opening and get extracted. We came partway down the hill and found an opening. This is a beautiful landing zone. It's hard to find such a beautiful open area in triple canopy jungle. You can see one guy across the opening, but there's 25 of us around the outside of this opening. And then we called for helicopters to come get us. It would be 6 helicopters that could carry up to 6 guys apiece. We'd put 5 on a helicopter. And now I just rotated the camera about 60 degrees to the right, and it shows someone popping a yellow smoke grenade. When the helicopters approach, and you can hear that they're getting quite close, we would get on the radio, get in radio contact with the pilot, and we would give them some instructions, look off to your left or something like that. And then once he was really close, we'd pop the smoke and say, please identify the smoke color. And the pilot, if he said yellow, we'd say, yeah, that's us, come on in and get us. And the reason we do it that way, instead of just telling the pilot, look for the smoke, is because if the pilot looks for the smoke and says, yeah, I see yellow smoke, the enemy has our smoke. And if the enemy happened to have radio contact and been on our frequency listening, and they heard the pilot say yellow smoke, they would pop a yellow smoke in order to get the helicopter pilot to come to them so they could shoot it down. So this is why we pop it and let him identify the color, not us. Now, if I turn the camera another 60 degrees to the right, there's the first helicopter coming in, picking up 5 guys. And once those guys are up and out, there's the second helicopter coming in from the top left, and you can see the third one circling around in the distance. So one at a time, they come in and pick us up. It's nice to be on the front end of this extraction because then there's lots of guys on the ground for your security. The worst position is when you're on the last helicopter, because when you're on the last helicopter, there's nobody left to protect you. If the enemy was there and they wanted to cause some damage, they would wait for the last helicopter, because they know that those guys are sitting ducks and they got no support. So if you're waiting for the last helicopter and it comes in, no matter if you're getting shot at or what, you have to run and jump on the helicopter because that's your only chance to survive. And there's one of the last helicopters leaving with two of my guys on it. That's Dennis Edwards on the left, Joe Doley on the right, and the door gunner. Getting out of there, I'm on one of the last helicopters. And then the trip back, there's an area that was hit by artillery or bombs. And now we're getting down by the river into the civilian area, getting close to the fire support base, hard times. Now we're on the ground. That's the Recon guys catching our breath. That's the last helicopter coming in. And that's our Lieutenant Lawrence Johnston on the left. When we got back to our bunker, the Tactical Operation Command radioed him and told him to come to the command bunker. He went in there and they congratulated him on a nice mission, promoted him from second lieutenant to first lieutenant. So he's unbuttoning his gold bar and putting on a silver bar. And when that happened, we were up here at hard times. We went by truck, by convoy, down a road, back to Camp Radcliffe, and we spent several days there not knowing where we were going. And where we were going was to the Cambodia incursion in May 1970, which we found out after a couple of days. When that happened, we got on a big, huge convoy, went down Route 19, past Pleiku, went to an asphalt road that went up here, turned into dirt, went up to New Plage Ring. And then we launched, in May, we launched an assault into NVA Base Area 702. But that's a presentation for another day. That kind of summarizes what the 5-week operation called Eichelberger Black was in Vinh Tan Valley. And that was a typical operation. When my grandkids ask, if they ever do, what did you do in the war, Daddy? It was like operations like Eichelberger Black, 5 weeks at a time, one after another with a couple of days off in between. And that was it. And we did those kind of operations all over the Central Highlands. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much. And when I give this presentation in the classrooms, I get various questions from the students. And here's a few that I received. The first one was, how difficult was it to adapt to military life? I answered a little tweak on this question is not military life was difficult, but nothing compared to life in combat. And the problem that I had in Vietnam was that whatever I was doing, it was nothing that I wanted to be doing ever for the whole time, all day long. There's nothing to do there that's appealing. And so after a little time, that wore on me. And I had a couple of pity parties where we were back in the rear and a couple of days off. And I just kind of break down a little bit and say, oh my God, we're just going to keep doing these operations over and over. And it's a mental problem to adapt to the combat thing. If you're in the military and you're back in the States and you get weekend passes and you eat the mess hall and all that, that's a pain, but it's definitely manageable. But the combat thing was very difficult for me. And how did I adapt to it? Suck it up. That's all I can say. You have no choice. So don't cry about it. Just one foot in front of the other and keep going. Were you afraid, and how did you deal with fear? Absolutely, I was afraid, but I learned to manage my fear. And the way I did that very early on, before I actually even joined my unit, I was on the helipad and I was supposed to go join my unit, and they informed me that I was not going to be able to because my unit was ambushed today. And so I'd have to spend the night on the base and go join them the next day. And that was a very difficult night because I'm thinking, oh my God, at that time, I thought I had a whole year in front of me. And I'm thinking, they got ambushed the very first day. How am I ever going to survive a year of this? And at that time, I reminded myself, I knew of the statistic that in a battle, for every soldier that's killed, there's an average of about 5 that are wounded. And so I reminded myself that even if we get in a bad situation, there's a better chance that I'll survive than there is that I won't survive. In addition to, say, for every one that gets killed, 5 are wounded, there's also a number that aren't wounded or killed. In each particular contact with the enemy, you've got better than 10 to 1 chance that you'll probably survive this thing. So that was what I call a happy thought. When I get into something dangerous, I just remember likelihood is that I'm going to survive. And then I didn't dwell on the fear. I was afraid, but there were periods where we had 3 or 4 weeks where we saw no enemy, had no any enemy contact. And when it's over and you're writing your book, it sounds like a period of peace. But the thing is that each day when you wake up, you don't know that day is going to be free of enemy contact. So there's fresh fear every morning. And it doesn't go away. So either you manage it or you don't. Now, we had guys that did not manage it well. They didn't have their little psychological tricks to convince themselves they're probably okay. And one of those guys had a nervous breakdown in the field. When we got to Cambodia, we had to send him out. That was the end of his military tour. We had another guy that we had to send to the rear to see a psychiatrist because he couldn't function because of nervousness, and our surprise, a few days later, they sent him back. And it's my belief, with no evidence, that probably these guys that suffered the problems in Vietnam probably are the ones that are most impacted by PTSD long after the war. And the ones that had some kind of a mechanism to deal with the fear maybe possibly weren't quite as badly impacted. Was it difficult to readjust to civilian life? I know that for many it was. For me, it really was not too bad. And the reason was I had a early out approved to get out of the Army up to 3 months early in order to return to a 4-year college. The Army had a program called the Early Out Program. And I was able to apply to California State University at Los Angeles, which I had already done a year and a half at, and get accepted and send that acceptance letter to my unit and with an application for an early out, and it was approved. So I was going to get out early. Now, it turned out nothing works according to plan. I ended up getting sick with hepatitis and some other disease, and I ended up getting out even earlier. And then once I got out and got back to the States, they wouldn't discharge me until I was well. But as it turned out, I got well and got discharged on a Wednesday, and classes started for the fall quarter in 1970 on the following Monday. So I had no time to sit around and dwell. I didn't have any adjustment time. I got home, I had a few days, and then I was in class trying to figure out how to pass my classes. And that was actually a blessing because I was taking mechanical engineering classes. They were plenty challenging, and I just focused on that, and I hadn't tried to forget the past. Are you in touch today with any of the men you served? Yes, I am. A lot of it's because of having written the book. I'd say there's more than a dozen that I've had email contact with. There's a few I've met in person. There's a few that are in the Southern California area, and we meet down at the American Legion Post in Newport once every year or two. We'll be meeting again very soon. And I'm in touch with some guys back in Wisconsin and Maryland and various other places.